Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Now, I will be taking a little bit more time to think over Rel and get a few more games on her before I want to make my video, so even though you may see Rel in the background, that is not who I'm going to be talking about today. But I do want to be talking today about Aphelios, as it is his first year anniversary of being released into League of Legends, so happy birthday to Aphelios, and I thought that would be a good time to sort of take a retrospective look back at Aphelios and kind of say, yeah, while this champion did have his bounce headaches, while he did have a lot of situations where he felt like a totally and completely unfair champion, a weird sort of addition to League of Legends, like he doesn't belong with everybody, I've sort of come around on the champ, and today I want to be talking about the reasons for why Aphelios exists in the form he does, and all of the good I think that Aphelios actually does for the game. I know this is a weird thing to hear me saying. I think I made like an entire video talking about how Aphelios has to get nerfed because he's just a stupid champion, but I do think that there's a really lot of things that Aphelios does for the game that I think is really, really good, and that I think that the game really could use. First and foremost, I want to say that Aphelios has just he brings forward the design of champions in League of Legends. Despite having a super deep design space, League of Legends does still have a finite limit on the number of champions it can design and the number of different abilities and kits and mechanics that it can add to the game. Like, that's just how game design works. You will eventually tap out of space. And while League of Legends potentially has years and years of champions still around, there will be a time when Riot won't be able to create something creative or do something that's a super fresh idea, and champions will feel more formulaic and less interesting. In that regard, I feel like Aphelios' inclusion is very good for Riot because it breaks them out of the traditional 4 buttons in a passive mold, right? Every single champion up until Aphelios' release had that exact same kit. Regardless of what their actual abilities were, that was sort of where they were at. They couldn't do anything else differently. So Aphelios being in the game and existing and having the ability to do these kinds of different things and have a different sort of interface entirely, that I think is a really good thing for the game because it allows Riot to no longer be beholden to that old system if there is an opportunity for them to make it happen, right? There's a potential for them to say, well, you know, we'd like to do this champion, but they don't really have 4 buttons, but we've done Aphelios before, so players are used to that by now, and we can do something different if we think that's going to be better. Now, I think it's unlikely that they're going to release a whole host of champions that don't use QWER like Aphelios. It's kind of his shtick at this point, so you don't want to step on his toes too much, but it does mean that they don't have to conform any future designs to that. So I do think that at the very least, Aphelios is sort of pushing forward champion design in League of Legends. And that's important because I think AD carries in particular have a whole host of design problems and issues with them. AD carries have the lowest design space of any class of champion in the game. And Riot's actually acknowledged this before, where they've basically said it's tough to design AD carries because of how formulaic they have to be. And that's because AD carries have the most specific requirements in order to be considered a member of that class. Now, I'm going to explain by using a couple of examples here, but so League of Legends obviously has a bunch of very broad classes of champions, like mages, who you can basically define a mage by saying a champion that deals magic damage with their spells, primarily. Right, there are other things to it, I would say, but generally speaking, that's what you're looking at when you're talking about mages. Like, that's what they're going to do. And as you can tell, that there's a ton of champions that you can design that fit that mold, right? As long as they are doing magic damage and using their abilities and probably auto-attacking not very much, if at all, that counts as a mage. And so you can even look at the number of mages that Riot has released. There have been a ton of them, and there have been some very, very interesting and unique designs. You have bursty champions like Zoe, you have drain tanking champions like Vladimir, you have some sort of mid-rangey champions that can scale very well like Cassiopeia or Ryze. Like, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with that sort of very broad description. Even assassins, I think, which there can generally be described as able to kill enemy squishies in one combo, right? Like, generally speaking, that's what defines an assassin. Obviously, there are some other classes that sort of overlap with that definition, so we're sort of playing super hard and dirty here. But either way, that's sort of what you can say for Assassin. And again, there's a lot of different designs you can do, whether or not you have things like LeBlanc, who's sort of distorting around the battlefield, cloning herself, doing some different things like that, or Zed, who very much so has a burst combo dependent on amplifying all of his damage all at once and sort of killing you with a single pop. There's still a lot of different designs that you can do for Assassins. AD carries, though, have the most specific design. They have to be able to deal consistent ranged auto attack DPS that functions against structures. That's very, very specific. Every AD carry has to be able to do that, which necessarily limits what Riot is able to actually design, right? You can have mages that can auto-attack or assassins who don't, but AD carries by default have to focus on their auto-attacking, either by threading auto-attacks with their abilities or just plain auto-attacking enemies until they die. And they have to be able to output ranged DPS. I would say that Yasuo was a possible contender for Riot to create a champion that maybe didn't have to be ranged, but still could count as an AD carry. But at this point in League of Legends development, I think it's safe to say that any AD carry basically has to be ranged in order for them to function at all. So in that regard, with the design space of AD carries so limited, I feel like Aphelios is a sort of breath of fresh air here. He still technically has his 4 buttons to press alongside everybody else, but at least he still makes you feel differently about auto-attacking while he cycles through his weapons, with each of his auto-attacks feeling different from each other, which each of his auto-attacks giving him sort of different tools and different things he can do. Like, there's a lot that Aphelios sort of opens up about AD carry design and makes it feel just a little bit different and a little bit more interesting than just the raw, you have a couple buttons, but you're mostly here to right-click things. Aphelios has a couple buttons, but he really is mostly about right-clicking things. His abilities sort of augment his auto-attack gameplay, but they don't fundamentally replace it. So I really do feel like that's a sort of interesting thing that Aphelios does in broadening the AD carry design space and maybe giving Riot some other possible designs that they can be using in the future for AD carries now that Aphelios exists and now that these sort of 4 buttons and a passive dichotomy has been broken away from. And finally, I feel like Aphelios is really interesting because of the interesting mindset you have to have while playing him and what he brings to League of Legends. Unlike a lot of champions, which most champions have a variety of tools that they're only limited in how they're able to react with them and sort of what their cooldowns look like. Like, any champion can kind of say, well, I have these abilities at my disposal. Here's an interesting situation that's come out of me out of nowhere. How do I use the tools at my disposal to make the situation turn up in the way I want it to, right? How do I get out of this gank? How do I make this execute happen? How do I play this team fight? Right, you can kind of think about a lot of these sort of champions like I like to think of it as the outplay factor. The enemy jungler ganks your lane as this champion. What tools do you have at your disposal? How do you use these tools to either outplay the gank or to escape from the gank? So that's what most champions are able to do. However, Aphelios doesn't quite have that, and that's because Aphelios does not have 100% all the time access to his assets. Literally, that's built into his kit. So I'm Heimerdinger, for example, and even though I might be slightly limited on turret kits, I can still always have, assuming cooldowns are available, I will have my Q, W, E, and R for use in any particular situation. Aphelios, however, he can only ever use 2 guns at a time, potentially a third if he's running out of ammo in one of them, or potentially 4 if he's running out of ammunition in both of them, but that is a limiting factor in and of itself, and we're not going to really worry about that too much. But so either way, Aphelios has to sort of say, what tools do I have on hand for this current situation? Do they even help me? If you're getting ganked and what you've got is Infernum and Crescendum, well, maybe you're not going to do that much in that gank. Maybe your option is to go for the outplay, kill the guy, as opposed to going for like an outplay to escape. Like you would do with something like Gravitum and Severum. So I do think that there's a lot of things that he can kind of do in order to sort of flexibility and sort of say, what tools do I have? What can I do in this situation, right? What am I actually allowed to do, as opposed to, well, I have these tools at my disposal so I can just kind of use them in whatever fashion I like. And what this means is that Aphelios ends up having to have a very, I think, prior planning playstyle. Aphelios really does have to sort of plan for engagements in advance. He has to kind of be thinking to himself, what do I have right now and what can I use right now in order to actually make this play happen, in order to set myself up for success. So a lot of champions don't have to worry about that, right? As long as they have their cooldowns, they just go into every situation with all their abilities up and kind of have to think on the fly, whereas Aphelios has to have that prior planning, and he's rewarded for doing so. If Aphelios says, we're about to be team fighting, I'm going to equip my AoE maximum DPS abilities, then he's going to get rewarded for that when then the team fight breaks out and he's just outputting an absolute ton of DPS from afar because he planned in advance, he picked the weapons he wanted for the situation, and was able to make it work. And he does still have the outplay potential like I talked about before, sort of being able to, well, I just got to work with whatever weapons I've got right here, so let's see if I can pull it off. But he does have the ability to also have that prior planning stage, and it leads to a very just as planned moment for Aphelios when it does all come together, when he has selected properly and then actually executes in game, which I think is, again, is a playstyle that no champion in the game really has. No champion, I think, has that sort of ability to plan it out in advance and sort of say, well, what tools do I actually want to use at the end of the day, right? Only Aphelios gets that sort of option. So I do think that's a very interesting playstyle he brings, and that there are a lot of players that probably do appreciate that, that say, wow, I really like that this champion does that as opposed to every other champion in the game. So, and now, at the end of the day, I'm not saying you have to like Aphelios or you have to like his inclusion in the game or anything about that champion. I'm really not. If you hate him, that's totally fine. There are lots of champions I dislike because I don't like how they play. I don't like how they play against. Just a lot of things like that. However, I think it's irresponsible to not consider the interesting playstyle he brings to the game and what he means for the future of League of Legends. So, anyways, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know what you think of Aphelios down in the comment section below, and if I brought up anything interesting that might have changed your opinion on Aphelios, let me know. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.